Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Halper, the head of ICAHD, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, coming to you from Jerusalem for my February 2025 update on what's happening in our region of the world, in particular, of course, in regards to the Palestinians. Uh, ICAHD, as you well know, because I've said this on every update, ICAHD has always been a big picture organization. In other words, yes, we resist, the occupation. We resist Israeli colonization on the ground through rebuilding Palestinian homes that have been demolished, working with Palestinian families, and working in all kinds of areas, whether it's water or against settlements or the walls or whatever Israel is doing in order to create the facts on the ground in the occupied territory. But you know what? Also inside Israel, because, we can't forget that. House demolitions, there are some years in which there are more demolitions of Palestinian homes inside Israel, of Palestinian citizens, than there are in the occupied territory. The Bedouins in the Negev face as much demolition, destruction, arrests, police harassment, and so on, as the Palestinians do in the West Bank. So we can't leave Israel out of the equation. So we do all that on the ground, and we try to have campaigns, and we resist, and we get all of you behind us in different ways, or at least get the information out. But at the same time, ICAHD has always been dedicated to a political solution, a resolution. In other words, not only protest, not only resistance, not only education and campaigning, but how do we get out of this? Um, and therefore, in all my updates, what I try to do is take all the events that can sometimes overwhelm us and try to put it within a larger framework, the bigger picture in a way. And that's what I'd like to do in a few minutes today, because we are, and I've talked about this before, entering really a perilous time. Um, uh, Zionism, we use this term all the time. Zionism is a settler colonialism. Um, uh, and uh, and settler colonialism, of course, is a movement. I mean, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the French in Algeria, South Africa, many other places as well. The Russians have used it, the Chinese have used settler colonialism, and so on. The British in Ireland. I mean, there's a lot of examples of it. Is a movement in which settlers come from somewhere else with the intention of taking over a country, and uh, and it has to do with displacing the population, taking its land, and then remaking the country in its own image, so that you erase the original country and it becomes a new country, both in terms of population and also in terms of its geography and the way we receive it. In other words, to transform Palestine, in our case, into Israel. So go to your travel agent at home and go try to buy a ticket to Palestine. There isn't any such thing. And that's exactly how settler colonialism wins. It's not that I mean, it's violent. It's a violent campaign of displacement and taking of land and so on, but it wins eventually. It wins eventually through sorry. Oh fuck. Can't all right, well, let's stop for it. Then I don't know. Hello, Ken. Oh, Bachayachat. All right. Okay. Sorry, everyone. There was an interruption, and I'm coming back to you. The point I was making when I got interrupted, is that settler colonialism ends with normalization. So settler colonialism, the point I'm trying to make is that it's not just a term, it's not just an accusation, it's not just a slogan, it really means something. And unless we understand Zionism, and of course, Zionism is the ideology, but not only the ideology, it's the policies. It's the structures. It's the actions that Israel is actually taking on the ground that are pushing Israel. In other words, it isn't Israel per se that's doing what it's doing. The whole purpose of what Israel is doing is Zionism. And the purpose of Zionism is settler colonialism, is to take over Palestine and transform it into a Jewish country. So if we're missing that bigger picture, that conceptual framework of settlers colonialism, if we're simply using it as a slogan, but we don't understand what it means, we're losing a tremendous instrument at our disposal that really can explain even specific events. Trump's coming up all of a sudden with the idea, which wasn't his idea, of transferring all the Palestinians out of Gaza. That comes out of the logic of settler colonialism, and it was planted in his head, if not by Netanyahu, simply by the logic of what do you do once you've taken over the country? um, the settlers. Once you've displaced the people, taken and made the country uninhabitable for them. That's certainly what Israel has done in a very dramatic way in Gaza, making Gaza uninhabitable. But it's really made all of Palestine uninhabitable for Palestinians by taking their lands, by demolishing their homes, by excluding them economically, and so on. So that what's happening in Gaza is a dramatic example of things that are happening much more quietly, but nevertheless inexorably in the West Bank and all the rest of Palestine, including within Israel, that we often kind of exclude from our picture of all of Palestine. So that the logic of what Trump is saying, even if he never read a book, he surely never read a book, but certainly never read a book about settler colonialism, he's already picked up the logic. Well, wait a minute. If it's uninhabitable, of course you got to move the population out. And then the twist is for their own good. you know. So he in Israel now, the Ministry of Defense of Israel, Israel Katz, has ordered the Israeli army to prepare to evacuate the Palestinian population from Gaza. But he's doing it, in a humanitarian way. Why? Because we can't let these people live in an uninhabitable area. So no one is asking, certainly no one has asked Trump, wait, how did it become uninhabitable? What was behind making it uninhabitable? You could attack Hamas, have a war against Hamas without rendering all of Gaza uninhabitable. So there's a logic behind it, you see? And even Trump is picked up with that logic. And that's what gives tremendous authenticity or force to our arguments. When we come and we try to advocate for Palestinian rights and against what Israel's doing, the more we can put it within this logic and this process of settler colonialism, the more easy it's going to be for people to understand, again, the big picture, what's really going on, instead of getting lost in the weeds of every particular outrageous event that happens. And of course, what Israel's strategy is to overwhelm us. Think of all the campaigns our different organizations are running. BDS campaigns, campaigns against for divestment, campaigns against arms groups, campaigns against settlers, against the wall. I mean, there's a lot of campaigns. Each one is a good campaign, but we're losing the forest for the trees, right? Because all these campaigns are focused on particular aspects of settler colonialism without really putting them within that bigger picture. And that's why we have to understand and use the concept of settler colonialism. And it has three basic elements, and we see it today. The violent takeover of another people's country, again, taking their land, displacing them, and then remaking the country in the settler's own image. The pacification of the local population. In other words, eliminating resistance to a point where the people cannot resist anymore. You see, And that's what we certainly try to see in Gaza. That's what we're certainly seeing in the northern part of the West Bank as well. And the third element is then normalization. Once you've taken over the country and violently pacified the population, you get to a point of normalizing everything, right? And then Israel, for example, becomes a great country to come visit. Tel Aviv is a pink friendly city. You've got beaches, you've got biblical sites. Christians want to come visit. In other words, normalization buries, not only buries, but it erases everything that's happened before, all the violence before, all the suffering before, um, and it becomes a new place where you start. All right, now we start here. Israel has gone through, Zionism has gone through two stages of normalization. One was in 1947 when the UN partitioned Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And here, the Zionist Jews who are in the country, maybe the vast majority, maybe 20 years, got 56% of Palestine, right? And the Palestinians were left with 42% of their own country. Uh, and then, so in other words, the UN itself normalized Zionism, normalized this Jewish claim to the country, and actually gave, with no authority, more than half of Palestine to the Jews. And then you had the Nakba. Then you had the war in 1948, where Israel then took half the land allocated to the Palestinians by the UN, and conquered it. Well, in international law, and by that time there was some international law, uh, conquering a territory, acquiring territory by force is illegal. You can't do that. But again, what happens? You create facts on the ground. So now Israel expands from 56% to 78% of the country, right? But that becomes normalized. That was kind of a second normalization. The first one was normalizing in general the Jews' claim to Palestine and giving them more than half the country. The second one was now 78% of the country belongs to Israel. And you know how powerful normalization is? Look, 1993, we begin the Oslo peace process. And where does Arafat and the PLO begin the negotiations? Not with 1947, not with the partition plan. It's still valid. No one has ever, it doesn't have a statute of limitations. The UN resolution giving Palestinians, even that was, of course, outrageous, but nevertheless, giving Palestinians 42% of Palestine is still in force. But normalization played its role. And even Arafat internalized the idea that Israel is on 78% of Palestine. So we begin the negotiations in Oslo with 78% versus 22%. Now the Palestinians are trying to negotiate how much of the 22% that remains, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, can they retain? So that's the power of normalization. And now we're entering into the third and final phase of normalization, because in 1967, of course, Israel conquered the rest of Palestine. It's controlled all of Palestine from that time. And now the task of Zionism is to normalize not the 56%, not the 78%, but the 100% control that Israel has over the country. Nonetheless, of course, you've got a large Palestinian population. Half the population of this country today is Palestinian. What do you do with them? Well, one of the answers is what Netanyahu and Trump are pushing on us: forcible displacement, forcible transfer, which is illegal in international law, of course, and that's what they're trying to do in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. Apartheid is what you finally do. Israel's not going to get rid of the 7 million Palestinians already living in Palestine. And therefore, the only way out for Israel is to confine them to little islands in a Bantustan, just like South Africa. We'll call that Bantustan a state, right? Even though it's non-viable, it's non-sovereign, it has no territorial integrity, no borders with any Arab country. We'll call it a state. We'll give it some collaborationist president like Abu Mazen or someone, and that's it. We have the two-state solution. Israel has control of 100% of Palestine, but de facto it's 85% of Palestine because you want to leave 15% or so in little islands for the Palestinian population that you don't want to give, of course, citizenship to, because then it wouldn't be a Jewish state. And it's over. That's normalization. And then you normalize with the international community, you normalize with the Arab world, which is what the Abraham Accords were all about. And the jewel in the crown, of course, now is Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is very willing to do this today. It wants some kind of a pathway to a Palestinian state. All this stuff we've heard for years, but effectively, the United States, the Arab governments, not the Arab peoples, but the Arab governments, and much of the international community, Europe is submissive in all of this, is in the process of finally normalizing Zionism, Israel, and on all of Palestine, and transforming Palestine into a Jewish country. So this is the danger. And we see it today as the final push, and we see all these three elements in play. The violent dispossession. We see it in Gaza, making Gaza uninhabitable and trying to push the people out. But we also see it in the West Bank, where Israel has released the settlers, the violent settlers, to attack Palestinian communities at will, with the intent of driving them off their lands and even driving a lot of the people out of the country completely that just can't stand it anymore. And in fact, the Israeli army has created a new unit called Desert Frontier, which is a unit of these violent settler youth that now have army uniforms, authority, weapons, and go in to forcibly displace Palestinian populations. So displacement, taking of the land, ethnic cleansing is going on now, but this is the final push for Israel to get Palestinians out, and certainly in the West Bank, in anticipation of normalization, to create the facts on the ground that it wants. In other words, that Israel controls Area C of the West Bank, the 62% of the West Bank that's called Area C, and locking the Palestinians then into this truncated Bantustan in areas A and B. The second part of the violent push going on right now is pacification. Certainly pacification in Gaza. I mean, Netanyahu is willing to sacrifice the hostages that are remaining in Gaza in order to eliminate Hamas. In other words, pacification means you have to eliminate every source of resistance possible. And so you've got Gaza, but you also have the northern West Bank. There's today a military operation going on in the refugee camps. And we have to remember refugees. Gaza, these are refugees from Israel. So actually, if you do want to resettle them, if Gaza is uninhabitable, why are you thinking about Egypt, Jordan, Albania, Indonesia? What about where they came from? They came from exactly the settlements that are circling Gaza today, the kibbutzim and the Israeli towns. Okay, let's resettle them in their native land from where they came, which is inside Israel. Israel should be the place. If it's uninhabitable, they have to resettle for their own good and so on. Okay, send them home. 80% or so, 70 to 80% of Gazans are refugees coming from the Negev, Nakab desert in southern Israel. And in the West Bank as well. You have what Israel calls the Gazification of the West Bank, using the same tactics of destruction, massive military force, and killing in the refugee camps, again, of Tulkarm, Jenin, Nablus, and the whole northern part of the West Bank, where there are still vestiges of resistance. So pacification is going on because Saudi Arabia and the Arab world demand an industrial quiet before they can get on with normalization. So they're saying to Israel, we'll normalize with you, but there has to be quiet first. We can't, with even Saudi Arabia has public opinion. You know, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the head of the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, said to Blinken, I don't care about the Palestinians, but my younger generation of my country does. So there's got to be some sop to the Palestinians, and that means a Palestinian Bantustan, because nobody really cares if this little Palestinian Bantustan is economically viable or sovereign or no. Just set up whatever you set up, destroy the resistance. Let's get to industrial quiet. And then we in the Arab world can move forward to normalize with Israel, right? And so that's the third part, normalization. And, uh, and that is proceeding. Um, uh, Trump is going back to the Abraham Accords. Uh, and one of the problems, and that's why the settler colonialism framework is so important, normalization sounds good to people. Great. Israel, the Arab-Israeli conflict. We're ending the conflict. We're normalizing Israel and the Arab world. Great. But the Palestinians get erased. They get completely lost in the shuffle here. And that's the intent. The intent is to eliminate the natives, to erase the Palestinians and their presence. Palestinians aren't even players in the game. They're not even at the table when these negotiations take place. And in a sense, we, together with the Palestinians we work with, have to be the watchdogs. We have to be, and this is, I think, our assignment today. Our assignment today is to stop this process of normalization. Because if, in fact, it goes through, and we're talking about the next few months, you know, Trump is talking about in the next couple months finally completing the Abraham Accords and actually achieving this normalization. So this isn't some far off idea. And again, this is how settler colonialism ends. So normalization is powerful. After normalization, you don't have much political space left. Palestinians will come back and say, well, wait a minute, what about our rights? What about our country? And the world says, wait, what do you mean? It's been normalized. Is there Abraham agreements? Everything is done. There is no more Palestinian issue. The whole point of the normalization process is to eliminate the Palestinian issue, and that's its danger. And it's very powerful normalization. We don't use that term often. It's very hard to go out and organize people against normalization. I don't think I've ever heard that term used in rallies to support Palestinians, but this is exactly the danger, the immediate danger facing the Palestinians. And this is what we have to focus on. And we can only get to that focus and that analysis and understand what's going on if we understand the settler colonial nature of Zionism and Israel. So ICAHD is initiating a campaign that we're calling a campaign against two-state apartheid. We use normalization, of course, but the way normalization is going to be packaged is in a two-state solution, because that's what all governments are for, even though, of course, there never was a two-state. You see, that's important too. If you look at settler colonialism, the intention was to transform all of Palestine into Israel, not 78% of it. So that there never was a two-state solution. That was simply not even in the conception of Zionism. But so it's never existed. But that's what governments are clinging on to because it's a great conflict management tool. They can keep that going forever, negotiations forever, two-state solution. Yes, we care about Palestinians. When everybody knows that what it really has to become is two-state apartheid. Israel will never allow, and the international community won't allow, actually, a genuine two-state solution, a a viable, truly sovereign Palestinian state in Palestine alongside Israel. That's simply not in the cards. Uh, we're we're part of the One Democratic State campaign. We believe the only way out is to replace Israel and its occupation with one democratic state of equal rights for everyone, and of course, the return of the refugees. But that's right now, I don't think we have to get into this issue of two states or one state or confederate, all these. Right now, the immediate danger is normalization. So, leaving aside the solution for the time being, we have to come together into a campaign against normalization, a campaign against two-state apartheid. So follow us at ICAHD. We're just beginning this. I'm having meetings tomorrow with our Palestinian partners in Haifa about this campaign. And if you want more information, contact ICAHD, contact me, jeffhalper@gmail.com, and and we'll begin to plug you in. So this is really the task, the immediate task in front of all our organizations. Part of the problem is that our organizations do not coordinate with each other. Everybody has its own turf, everybody has its own agenda, and we need to pull ourselves together. The major organizations and local organizations have got to come together on this issue of normalization. It includes a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, but this is the meta campaign that we have to launch, the most urgent and immediate campaign. So that's the update and the assignment for February 2025. I'll see you soon. Bye.